Hello, today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi RY405010BTL 40 volt 14-inch brushless chainsaw. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off at the bottom of the tool, we have the battery slot. The battery slot will accept any of Ryobi's 40 volt batteries, and overall, it is a fairly decent slot. There is a little bit more looseness or play than I personally like seeing, but that's fairly common with Ryobi's 40 volt battery system, and it's something that I hope they rectify in the future and make the tolerances a little bit tighter. But when it comes to this particular saw, I haven't had it drop any batteries or lose power because of a loose battery or anything, so quite frankly, it still gets a pass. Okay, now when it comes to battery life, it really does depend on what you're trying to cut through. Is it big? Is it little? How much of it is there? Is it, what kind of wood is it? You know, those sort of things. I found that a single 4 amp hour battery will be able to finish up most jobs fairly easily. However, if you are planning on making a day out of brush clearing or tree limbing, then you might need to pack a couple of extra batteries. But for the most part, I've been very happy with how well it seems to work with the included 4 amp hour battery, and I don't really have any major complaints. So as far as I'm concerned, the battery life is completely acceptable and it will get the job done. But like I said earlier, it really does depend on what you're cutting through, how old your batteries are, and so on and so forth. But for the most part, it gets a pass. Okay, next up we have the mounting hole or the hanging hole, whatever you want to call it. For me personally, this is a useful little feature, although it is not something that I personally use to store the tool. I like storing mine in a drawer that is lined in cardboard to soak up all the oil that leaks out of it, since that's, well, pretty much the most common thing that chainsaws do, is leak their oil. But if you are the kind of person that likes to, well, hang up their particular chainsaws or tools on a pegboard in the garage or something like that, this does have the feature of, well, having a place where you can do that. So yeah, I think it's completely acceptable and there really is no complaints from me. So yeah, moving on. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the onboard tool. Now the onboard tool is stored on the bottom side of the tool near the rear of the tool on that housing, and is securely kept in place by a little metal ridge that will keep it from vibrating itself free. I don't have any complaints about where it's stored, and it's very nice having the tool stored on the saw, so quite frankly, no complaints there. Now, the onboard tool is basically a 13mm wrench at one end that you'll use to remove the clutch cover, and a flat head at the other end, which you will use to tighten or loosen the chain. This is the standard approach that Ryobi usually takes, except for the fact that it's an actual wrench. And quite frankly, I don't have any complaints about this particular tool. It's completely made out of metal. It fits in there nice and securely, and yeah, that's about the size of it. The only thing I do have to say is if you do end up managing to lose it, you might have a hard time locating a replacement. But then again, maybe you won't. But for me personally, I do like this particular onboard tool, and it definitely gets a pass from me. Okay, next up we have the trigger and safety, which they're kind of the same thing, to be honest, since it's a constant safety system, which means you'll have to pull the safety back each and every time you want to pull the trigger. There's no way to lock the safety off permanently. Now, the safety on this particular chainsaw is in a good location and is easy to access with your fingers. It's made out of a grayish tannish plastic as normal on a Ryobi tool, and I don't really have any complaints about it. So yeah, the safety gets a pass. Moving on to the trigger is also made out of the same plastic material and is fairly easy to control. It's a 2-finger trigger that controls the variable speed motor in this particular chainsaw. And when it comes to the variable speeds on this particular chainsaw, I am happy to inform you that they are fairly well distanced apart, or the definition in between the different speeds is good, and you have around 13 to 14 speeds to work with. I wasn't exactly sure the exact number, so I'm going to say about 13 for sure, but you can possibly have 14 different speeds to work with. But getting to each one and every one of those individual speeds is, well, going to be dependent on how well you are able to, well, control the trigger. But I do think that the definition in between the speeds is fairly good, and I don't really have any complaints about the trigger. So yeah, everything here is perfectly satisfactory, and there's no major red flags. So yeah, everything here gets a pass. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the grips on this particular saw. Overall, I'm fairly happy with the ergonomics of this particular tool. The foregrip is made out of a hard black plastic that has small texturized bumps that makes it very easy to grip, especially if your hands are sweaty or damp. And the rear grip has a nice rubberized texture, which allows you to have a firm grip when you are grasping, well, the trigger. Quite frankly, there really is nothing wrong with the overall ergonomics of this particular tool, and the fact it also features the wraparound handle on the front end means that you can easily use this tool in a horizontal position. So at the end of the day, I think the grips on this particular tool are perfectly acceptable. There is a little bit of flex on the forward grip, but there isn't so much that you need to worry about, and I still feel like I have full control over the saw at all times. So yeah, I think the ergonomics on this particular tool are good, and I don't really have anything else to say. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the oiling system. The oiling system on this particular chainsaw it's fairly mediocre. It definitely isn't the best system in the world, and it definitely has some drawbacks. The positives going for it is the fact that it just oils the chain fairly evenly, and it doesn't dump all the oil at once, so you don't have to worry about wasting tons of oil. The downsides, however, are it's impossible to figure out where you are at on the oil tank judging from the outside of the tank. You pretty much have to take the cap off and look down. And, well, it's got the same shortcoming as most oilers on most chainsaws, meaning that you have to drain the oil each and every single time you get done using the chainsaw, otherwise it's going to just drain out all over the place. Since there's no ball valve to shut off the system, which I still don't understand why they don't do that, but at the end of the day, it's just something else you need to be aware of. And even if you do end up draining the oil out of the tank, I would still highly recommend leaving this particular chainsaw stored on top of a piece of cardboard, because there's still going to be some oil left that will leak out no matter what you do. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's a fairly standard system, and it definitely isn't the best, but it's not the worst either. It's just fairly mediocre. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the top guard. The top guard is made out of a black plastic and will help protect your hands against any sort of debris or branches that might come snapping back at your hands. Now, on a 40-volt chainsaw, this probably isn't necessarily something you need, but I am grateful to have it, and so it definitely is a pro in my opinion. But like I said earlier, it's definitely a much more useful feature on a gas-powered chainsaw where the chain is moving much quicker. So yeah. That's about all I have to say. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the clutch cover as well as the chain tightening system. Now the clutch cover is made out of plastic and it's held in place by two 13mm nuts, which is a fairly simple system and is more than good enough. Now, in the past I've mentioned how much I like toolless systems, but after trying one of Ryobi's toolless systems, I have to say that I prefer this particular setup over their toolless systems. Now, once you remove the nuts, you'll be able to access underneath the cover, which will allow you to change the bar out, or to change the chain out, or to just do routine maintenance and cleaning. Overall, everything underneath here is pretty simple. You have the drive mechanism, or the clutch, as well as the bar for, well, the chain, as well as the chain itself. Now, obviously, it gets fairly dirty underneath here since there's an oiling system, so I do recommend cleaning this out after a large job or whenever you have the ability to. Now, moving back to the cover itself, you'll notice there is a post sticking out. This is going to be slotted into the bar and is going to be your chain tensioning system. So when you're reassembling the chainsaw, you want to make sure that that little post slots into the bar on the chainsaw. So you might have to do some adjusting in order for it to slot in correctly. And once you have it slotted in correctly, then you will be able to reattach the nuts and tighten everything down. Once you start tightening everything down, you'll want to make sure that you get the bar adjusted to where you need it. And in order to do that, you will rotate the little flat-headed screw that's located near the bottom of the clutch cover. And you might have to adjust the screw in order to get the cover back on, depending on where the bar was previously set at. This can be a little bit tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too hard to do. So yeah, here in a second we'll go over how to tension the chain. Okay, once you get everything lined up and everything fitted back together, you can go ahead and put the nuts back onto the two posts and start to tighten them down. Now, you won't want to tighten them down completely because you still have to adjust the tension of the chain, but get them a little bit snug so everything stays in place for when you're tightening them. Once you have both the nuts tightened onto the posts that they sit on top of, then you'll be able to take your onboard tool and then start adjusting the screw that is located near, kind of in the middle down low, where I just inserted it. Then you'll be able to start turning it. This will either loosen or tighten it depending on which direction you are currently turning it. Now, once you start to tighten the chain, you want to make sure that there is enough tension to that the chain won't come flying off or become loose or become disattached from the bar, but still be free enough where it can easily be pulled around the bar. So it is kind of a bit of a guessing method, and everybody will have a different way of doing it or judging what they personally like. I like for there to be enough for me to be able to easily pull the chain with one hand and still not be able to pull off with one hand. Some people say that you should have it so that you can get your thumb underneath it. I've heard different approaches, but for me personally, I just like making sure that there's no way that the chain can physically become detached from the bar. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you and whatever method that you personally use, but for me, that's what I do. And once you figure out what your tension should be, then you can go ahead and tighten up the two 13mm bolts until they are firm and secure in place, and then you'll be all set to go. So overall, the tightening system on this particular chainsaw is completely adequate, and I don't really have any complaints. Unlike the toolless system I tried from Ryobi. That one I had complaints on. But for this particular saw, it is completely acceptable. Moving on. And last but not least, we have the bar chain as well as the scabbard. Now, the bar on this particular chainsaw is a 14-inch bar. The chain is a 14-inch chain. And, well, that's all true. But unfortunately, when it actually comes to true cutting capacity, you're going to be looking at right around 12 inches, which is more than good enough for the vast majority of people. But if you're right at the edge of needing an absolute 14-inch cutting chainsaw, you're probably going to want to skip over this one. This is definitely a 12-inch cutting capacity chainsaw in the real world. Like I said earlier, it is a 14-inch bar, it is a 14-inch chain, but it does not have the cutting capacity of 14 inches because of the way that the bar is secured to the body of the chainsaw. Now, when it comes to the chain on this particular chainsaw, it seems to do just fine, and it seems pretty sharp, and I haven't had any issues with it coming apart or breaking or anything like that. So no complaints when it comes to the chain. Now, when it comes to the scabbard, I am happy to report that the scabbard is also good. It stays in place and it doesn't come off easily, and even if you store the chainsaw in a vertical position, it will stay in place. So the scabbard is good, the chain is good, but the bar is definitely closer to 12 inches of usable space rather than 14 inches. So yeah, just something that you need to be aware of. This is something I've seen on other brands, but it is always a little bit irritating when you don't actually have a true 14 inches of cutting capacity. So yeah, just something to be aware of. Moving on. Okay, without a battery, the tool weighs 4,087 grams, which is around 9 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs 5,402 grams, which is just shy of 12 pounds. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this particular saw in use. I have to say that I've been actually very happy with this particular saw's performance. I've been using it to cut out several different varieties of dead trees that we have on our property. Thank you, you nasty, horrible deer, for killing all of our trees. And it's been very useful in removing a variety of those dead trees. It's been very helpful for removing the dead junipers, the dead lilacs. Thank you, deer. I'm joking, I really am hating deer at this point in my life. And, well, quite frankly, it's also done a fantastic job on the cottonwoods and elms, as well as the occasional Russian olive or cottonwood. So, at the end of the day, I have to say that pretty much anything I throw at this particular saw, it's been able to handle just fine. I don't think any of those trees are especially hard for a chainsaw to work with, but it's just nice to be able to have a chainsaw that has more power than say, 18 or 20 volts that can make shorter work than, say, a standard, well, 18 or 20 volt chainsaw. So, I really do enjoy using this particular saw, and it's become my go-to. Now, if you're used to a gas chainsaw, this might be a step down for you. But the overall convenience of having a battery-operated chainsaw that you don't have to worry about it starting or not starting, or having to get gas, having the gas go bad, having to worry about mixing gas, you get the idea. This is just way more convenient, and it's definitely going to make the average homeowner's job of maintaining their property a lot easier. And the fact that it also runs off of that 40-volt battery means that if you have a 40-volt mower, a trimmer, blower, you'll be able to, well, use your batteries in those tools as well, which is another draw to this particular saw. Ryobi has quite the extensive 40-volt lineup, and there's a lot of different options and tools that you can choose from. And quite frankly, I've been very happy with their lineup. I especially love their post hole digger. That tool is amazing. So, at the end of the day, this is definitely going to be a fantastic saw for anybody who's in the Ryobi 40-volt system, or looking to get into the Ryobi's 40-volt system. A lot of their tools are really good. Quite frankly, Ryobi's biggest shortcoming is they usually have fantastic tools with one major downside that you'll have to jury rig or fix. But for this particular saw, there really is nothing wrong with it other than the fact that you only have 12 inches of usable space on that 14-inch bar. And I think that's still an acceptable, trade-off considering just how well this particular saw works. I've been very happy with this particular saw, and I don't think there's anything majorly wrong with it other than what I've already mentioned. So at the end of the day, I think this is a great saw to consider. But with that being said, let's go ahead and recap with the pros and cons. 40 volt. 40 volt is definitely the way to go, especially if your options are a 20 volt chainsaw or a 40 volt chainsaw. So in my opinion, this is a pro. Handling. Overall, the handling on this particular chainsaw is very good. I really do like the ergonomics on this particular chainsaw, and when you combine it with the weight and power that it has, it means that it's a nifty little package to use in a variety of situations. So overall, the handling is definitely a pro on this chainsaw. Compact. This is a fairly compact chainsaw, especially when you compare it against, say, an 18 or 20 inch chainsaw, which means this is going to be a great option for people who are into camping and have space constraints in their vehicles. Brushless. Having the brushless motor means that you'll have a longer run time, you'll have a better motor life, and it's going to have more torque. Need I say more? Definitely a pro in my opinion. Onboard tool. The onboard tool makes it a breeze to change out the bar, to clean the chain, to adjust the chain, or to change the chain out. Quite frankly, the onboard tool is a pro and is definitely a nice feature on this tool. I know I already mentioned it, but seriously, this is way better than an 18 volt chainsaw. Just do yourself a favor and don't even consider an 18 volt chainsaw if your options are this or an 18 volt chainsaw. Moving on. And the first con would be the oil system. It's not horrible, but it definitely could be improved. I really don't know why they can't put a ball valve in between the tank and the bar. Is it that hard? So, in my opinion, the oiling system on this particular chainsaw, while it isn't horrible, it's definitely not nearly as good as it could be. Moving on. Chain tightening. Having to use the onboard tool to adjust the tension of the chain is a bit of a drag, especially if you've owned a chainsaw with a toolless chain tightening system. Unless it was a Ryobi toolless chain tightening system. Then you're going to be very grateful for the included tool, because Ryobi doesn't know how to make a toolless system well. Moving on. And last but not least, not a true 14-inch saw. And what I mean by that, it does have a 14-inch bar, but you only have 12 inches of usable space on that 14-inch bar. So this is another area of the tool that could use some improvement. But with that being said, it's more than enough for the average person. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular chainsaw. I really do like this particular chainsaw. It's definitely my current go-to chainsaw because of its size, its capability, its power, and just how well it performs. I don't think there's any reason to consider anything in the 18 or 20 volt category if you have the ability to buy this particular chainsaw, because this thing just blows them all out of the water. I think that this is a great option to consider, and it definitely comes highly recommended, as long as you are aware of its shortcomings. And that is it for this video. It turned out to be a little bit of a longer video, but for the price point of this particular tool, I think that's acceptable. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. God bless.